Dawn breaks over the English Channel on June 6, 1944. The water churns with thousands of steel shapes moving toward the Norman coast. They are ugly things, these boats. Flat-bottom boxes with blunt bows and exposed crews. No sleek lines, no elegant curves, no aesthetic concessions whatsoever. They look like something a desperate man might weld together in a junkyard. In 6 hours, they will deliver more than 150,000 men onto 5 separate beaches. Many of those men will die in the first 30 seconds after the bow ramps drop. But without these ugly boats, none of them reach the beach at all. The vessel that made D-Day possible was invented by a man the United States Navy did not trust, did not like, and did not want to do business with. His name was Andrew Jackson Higgins, and in 1938 he was a New Orleans boat builder with a reputation for brawling, drinking, and building vessels that worked in impossible conditions. The problem facing American military planners in the late 1930s was existential. War was coming. Everyone knew it, and modern war would require amphibious assault on a scale never before attempted. The Pacific Theater would demand island hopping across thousands of miles of ocean. The European theater would require landing armies on hostile shores defended by the most sophisticated military in the world. Existing landing craft were inadequate to the point of uselessness. British designs required piers or jetties. Japanese vessels had deep drafts that grounded far from shore. American military landing craft needed calm water and specialized facilities. None of them could drive directly onto a beach, unload in seconds, and withdraw for another run. The specification seemed impossible. A vessel that could carry 30 to 40 combat-loaded troops, navigate in 3 feet of water or less, drive directly onto any beach regardless of composition, drop a ramp allowing instant egress, protect its occupants from at least small arms fire, reverse off the beach without turning around, do this repeatedly under fire in conditions ranging from calm Pacific lagoons to the storm-tossed North Atlantic, and do it cheaply enough to build thousands of them. Andrew Higgins was not the man the Navy wanted for this job. He was abrasive, profane, and contemptuous of military bureaucracy. He had never built a military vessel. His company specialized in boats for oil exploration and, during Prohibition, vessels that rum runners favored for their shallow draft and reliability. The Revenue Service had chased Higgins' boats through Louisiana bayous for years, almost never catching them. Higgins understood something the Navy's naval architects did not. The problem was not how to build a boat that could reach a beach. The problem was how to build a boat that could leave one. In the swamps and marshes of Louisiana, Higgins had perfected a design that could power through water measured in inches, drive onto mud banks, unload cargo, and reverse back into navigable water. The hull was nearly flat. The propeller sat in a semi-tunnel that protected it from obstacles. The engine was mounted aft, not amidships. The bow was blunt and reinforced. It was, by every conventional standard, an ugly design. It was also exactly what the military needed, though they did not yet know it. The first meeting between Higgins and Navy procurement officers did not go well. Higgins showed up with blueprints for what he called a spoonbill boat. The Navy representatives looked at his design and saw a glorified barge. They wanted something that looked like a landing craft. Higgins told them they were idiots. The Navy was not accustomed to being called idiots by civilian contractors. They rejected his proposal. Higgins went back to New Orleans and kept building boats. The Navy went back to trying to solve an unsolvable problem with conventional thinking. This might have been the end of the story, except that someone in the Marine Corps had been paying attention. The Marines had been conducting their own landing experiments. They had been studying the problem from the perspective of men who would actually have to step off these boats under fire. And they had concluded that everything the Navy was designing would get Marines killed in unacceptable numbers. In 1941, the Marines invited Higgins to demonstrate his boat at New River, North Carolina. He arrived with several vessels and a challenge. Show him any beach, any conditions, any load, and he would land it. The Marines took him up on it. They watched as Higgins' boats drove directly onto sand, mud, and gravel shores. They watched the boats discharge cargo and troops in seconds. They watched the boats reverse off beaches without turning around, without getting stuck, without requiring any special handling. Then the Marines told Higgins to add a bow ramp. The original design required troops to vault over the sides. Under fire, this was suicide. A ramp would allow men to charge forward the moment the boat grounded. Higgins went back to his workshop and returned with a modified design. The LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, was born. The Navy had no choice but to place orders. The ugly boat nobody wanted became the ugly boat nobody could win without. The Higgins boat measured 36 feet, 3 inches in length, beam of 10 feet, 10 inches, draft of 3 feet in the rear, 2 feet forward, empty weight of 18,000 pounds. These were not impressive numbers. A modern pickup truck has more aesthetic appeal, but every dimension, every angle, every material choice served a specific purpose, born from brutal operational reality. The hull was welded steel, not the plywood of the original bayou boats. Quarter-inch plate on the sides, thicker at the bow, enough to stop rifle rounds and shrapnel, not enough to stop a direct mortar hit or machine gun fire at close range. The choice was deliberate. More armor meant more weight. More weight meant deeper draft. Deeper draft meant grounding farther from shore. Grounding farther from shore meant longer exposure in the water. Longer exposure meant more men dead. The mathematics were unforgiving. 3 feet of draft allowed the LCVP to reach beaches that stopped other landing craft hundreds of yards offshore. In the Pacific, where coral reefs extended far from shore, this difference meant everything. The bow ramp was the revolutionary element, though it looked like the simplest part of the design. A steel plate 10 feet wide, hinged at the bottom, held vertical by cables running to the coxswain's position. When the boat grounded, the coxswain pulled a lever. The cables released. The ramp dropped forward, forming a bridge from the boat to the beach. 36 men could charge out in under 10 seconds if they did not hesitate. If they did hesitate, they died in the boat. The ramp became a symbolic and literal threshold between relative safety and immediate danger. Men learned to time their exit to the ramp's descent. Too early and you tripped. Too late and the man behind you pushed you forward. The ramp also served a secondary purpose. When raised, it provided frontal protection. German and Japanese gunners learned to aim for the gap between the ramp's top edge and the gunwale, trying to hit the coxswain. Many succeeded. Coxswain mortality rates were among the highest of any naval specialty. The job required standing fully exposed while driving straight toward enemy fortifications. Replacements were constantly needed. The engine was a gray marine diesel, either a 64 horsepower or a 225 horsepower variant, depending on production year. Mounted at the stern behind armored housing, it drove a single propeller through a reduction gear. The propeller sat in a tunnel formed by the hull's shape, protecting it from debris and allowing reverse movement without turning the boat around. This tunnel design was pure Higgins, derived from years of swamp running where propellers that struck logs or sandbars meant death by revenue service. Maximum speed was 12 knots when loaded, faster when empty. This was not fast. A man could almost outrun a Higgins boat if the man was not carrying 80 pounds of combat equipment through surf. But speed was less important than reliability. The boats had to make multiple runs. 6, 8, 10 trips from ship to shore, each time returning through the same fire corridor. Mechanical failure was not acceptable. Higgins' boats were beaten, swamped, grounded, broached, and hammered by surf and bullets. They kept running. Maintenance crews performed repairs between waves, sometimes welding patches while the boat was still in the water. Capacity specifications told the story of the LCVP's versatility. 36 fully equipped infantrymen, or 12,000 pounds of cargo, or a single jeep with its crew, or 5,000 pounds of ammunition with a crew of 8 to unload it, or medical supplies, or rations, or communications equipment, or flamethrowers, or anything else an army needed on a hostile beach. The flat bottom and open cargo well meant there were no complex loading procedures. Drive it on, drive it off, charge forward. Later variants added side-mounted machine gun positions, twin 50 caliber Brownings, one port, one starboard, to provide suppressing fire during the final approach. The gunners stood exposed, firing over the gunnels. They died frequently. The positions were considered near suicidal assignments, but someone had to do it, because without suppressing fire, the boats became shooting galleries. Higgins kept refining the design throughout the war. Lessons learned at Guadalcanal influenced boats built for Sicily. Lessons from Sicily influenced Normandy. The basic design never changed. Steel box, flat bottom, bow ramp, stern engine. Everything else was optimization. By 1945, Higgins Industries was producing 700 boats per month. Workers in New Orleans, many of them women, many of them black, in a still segregated city, welded, riveted, and painted these vessels in assembly lines that ran 24 hours a day. Higgins integrated his workforce years before the military did, because he needed workers and did not care about their race or gender. The Navy objected. Higgins told them to go to hell. The boats kept coming. The experience of riding a Higgins boat into combat followed a pattern that thousands of men came to know with nightmare clarity. First, the scrambled down cargo nets from the transport ship, burdened with equipment, fingers numb from cold or fear. Missing a rung meant falling into the gap between ship and boat, where you would be crushed. Men fell. Then the weight inside the boat, circling in formation, sometimes for hours, while naval bombardment pounded the shore. Seasickness was universal. Men vomited onto each other, into their helmets, over the sides. There was no dignity in it. Then the formation, dozens of boats forming lines, preparing for the run to shore. The coxswain opened the throttle. The boat pitched forward into the waves. Spray came over the bow and sides, soaking everyone. The noise made communication impossible. The diesel engine screamed. Men shouted to each other but could not be heard. Mortar rounds began landing nearby, throwing up geysers of water. Machine gun fire walked across the waves, stitching patterns of white splashes that moved closer. Then the grinding crunch of the keel on sand or gravel, the sudden deceleration throwing men forward. The ramp dropped. Light and sound flooded in. Hell was outside. Omaha Beach on June 6th presented conditions that made the Higgins boat's limitations horrifically clear. German defenders on the bluffs above had pre-sighted every yard of beach. MG-42 machine guns fired 1,200 rounds per minute. The first ramps dropped at about 6:30 a.m. The first men out died before their boots touched sand. Some boats lost 36 men in under 30 seconds. Entire squads were cut down in the boat or at the waterline. The bodies floated, held up by their life jackets, forming grotesque clusters. Following waves had to push through floating corpses. Some coxswains, seeing the slaughter, dropped ramps in deeper water, giving men a chance to dive under the bullets. Men drowned under the weight of their equipment. Other coxswains drove closer, accepting fire to get men onto dry sand. These coxswains usually died at their controls. By noon, the beach was carpeted with dead and wounded, but the boats kept coming. Wave after wave, every 3 to 5 minutes, new boats grounded and disgorged their cargo. The sheer volume overwhelmed German defenses. You cannot kill everyone when everyone keeps coming forever. By nightfall, over 34,000 men had crossed Omaha Beach. Perhaps 3,000 died doing it. Without Higgins' boats, none of them land at all. Tarawa Atoll in November 1943 revealed different horrors. Intelligence had assured planners that the reef surrounding the island would have sufficient depth at high tide for landing craft. Intelligence was wrong. Higgins boats grounded on the reef, 700 yards from shore. The water was 4 feet deep. Men climbed over the sides and waded through a reef that tore their feet apart while Japanese machine guns fired from reinforced positions. The lagoon turned red. Bodies drifted in the current. Some boats found channels through the reef and delivered their men to the beach. These men had better survival rates, but not by much. The island was a fortress. It took 76 hours to secure Tarawa. Over 1,000 Marines died. Nearly all the casualties occurred in the water or on the beach in the first few hours. Survivors remembered the sound of bullets hitting water all around them, the volcanic sand that gave no cover, the smell of death in tropical heat. They remembered that the boats that got them closest to shore gave them the best chance. The boats that grounded far out were death sentences. Iwo Jima in February 1945 showed what happened when defenses were perfect and assault was inevitable. Japanese commanders had fortified every inch of the volcanic island. They had artillery sighted on every potential landing zone. They waited until the beaches were packed with men and equipment before opening fire. The Higgins boats delivered 70,000 Marines onto those beaches over several days. The boats broached in volcanic sand surf, flipped by waves, swamped by undertow. Coxswains fought to hold position long enough to unload. Some succeeded, some did not. The beach became a junkyard of destroyed equipment, burning vehicles, and bodies. But the Marines kept coming because the boats kept bringing them. This was the grim arithmetic of amphibious warfare. Acceptable losses meant some percentage could die as long as enough survived to establish a beachhead. The Higgins boat did not reduce casualties to zero. Nothing could. But it delivered men to the fighting with enough speed and volume that the fighting could be won. Across 2 oceans, across dozens of beachheads, the pattern held. High casualties in the first waves, overwhelming volume in subsequent waves, victory through attrition and courage. The boat made it possible. The British had their own landing craft designs. The LCA, Landing Craft Assault, carried 31 men and had armor sufficient to stop machine gun rounds. It drew less water than early American designs and had better frontal protection, but it was slower, more complex to build, and less versatile in cargo capacity. The British used them effectively, particularly in the Mediterranean. But when planning for Normandy, British commanders requested American Higgins boats to supplement their own craft. The LCVP could carry more, move faster, and operate in rougher sea states. German landing craft, developed for the aborted invasion of Britain in 1940, were heavier and better armored, but required longer beach time to unload. They were designed for unopposed landings, not contested beaches. Japanese Daihatsu landing craft shared the bow ramp concept and similar dimensions, but used gasoline engines prone to fire when hit. American Marines who captured Daihatsu barges in the Pacific reported that they functioned adequately, but lacked the Higgins boat's reliability under sustained use. Soviet forces used American landing craft delivered through Lend-Lease, including thousands of Higgins boats. Soviet designers later copied the basic design for post-war amphibious vehicles. Every navy that conducted amphibious operations during the war either used Higgins boats or wished they had more of them. The most significant assessment came from enemies. General Dwight Eisenhower, in a post-war interview, stated that Andrew Higgins was the man who won the war for us. He elaborated that without the Higgins boat, Allied strategy in both theaters would have been impossible to execute. Churchill, typically grudging in praise of American achievements, acknowledged that the LCVP was among the crucial innovations that enabled Allied victory. But perhaps the most telling evaluation came from German strategic analysis. In captured documents from Hitler's command staff, the Higgins boat was specifically identified as one of the key enablers of American offensive capability. German coastal defenders, in after-action reports from Normandy, Sicily, and Italy, consistently noted that the speed of American landing operations prevented effective counterattacks. Troops arrived on beaches faster than German mobile reserves could reposition. The volume of arrivals overwhelmed defensive positions designed to repel smaller forces. The psychological effect was mentioned repeatedly. Defenders described the horizon filling with landing craft, hundreds of them, an unstoppable tide of steel and men. No matter how many boats were destroyed, more kept coming. This created a sense of inevitability that weakened morale and encouraged surrender. Hitler himself, in recorded conversations from 1943, expressed frustration that German forces could not prevent American landings. He understood that once a beachhead was established, the Allies would win through industrial and manpower superiority. The Higgins boat was the tool that established those beachheads. Production numbers tell their own story. Between 1942 and 1945, American factories produced over 23,000 Higgins boats of various types. The LCVP was the most numerous, with over 20,000 built. Peak production reached 700 units per month in early 1945. Higgins Industries employed over 30,000 workers in New Orleans alone. The company also produced patrol boats, supply vessels, and specialized craft. Andrew Higgins became wealthy from military contracts, but spent much of it expanding production rather than enriching himself. He drove his workers hard and paid them well. He fought with military bureaucrats, with rival contractors, and with anyone who suggested his designs were insufficient. He was crude, difficult, and absolutely confident in his work. In 1945, when the war ended, military contracts ceased almost overnight. Higgins Industries collapsed within 2 years. Andrew Higgins died in 1952, largely forgotten. The boats he designed outlived him by decades. Many Higgins boats saw service in Korea. Some were still in use during Vietnam. Countless others served as civilian workboats, fishing vessels, and island transports across the Pacific. The basic design influenced every amphibious assault craft that came after. The legacy is visible in modern military equipment. Every current amphibious assault vehicle uses the bow ramp concept. The United States Marine Corps' current AAV-7, the Navy's LCAC hovercraft, the new EFV expeditionary fighting vehicle, all descend from Higgins's innovation. The principle remains unchanged. Drive onto the beach, drop the ramp, discharge cargo or troops, reverse away. 75 years of technological advancement have added armor, speed, and firepower, but the fundamental concept is pure Higgins. In New Orleans, a museum preserves several Higgins boats and tells the story of their creator. Visitors can stand inside the cargo well and imagine what it felt like to ride one into combat. The space is cramped, the steel walls are close, the view is limited. It is not difficult to imagine the terror. Andrew Higgins never saw combat. He never rowed his boats onto a hostile beach, but he understood what those boats needed to do, and he built them to do it. When asked about criticism that his designs were ugly and utilitarian, he responded with characteristic bluntness, "The hell with what it looks like. It does what I said it would do." Thousands of men owed their lives to that stubborn pragmatism. They rowed his ugly boats onto Hitler's beaches and survived because Higgins cared more about function than form. The boat nobody wanted became the boat that changed warfare forever.